From the lawn, the little red recording light on her daughter's phone blinked, steady as a conspirator's heart, aimed directly at the smoking window where Kaylee had just escaped. A shard of glass, still clinging to Kaylee's forearm, seemed to burn hotter than the house behind her. But the tremor in Kaylee's knees wasn't from fear. It was the quiet thrum of a clock starting counting down. The moment she would turn and begin to gather her own evidence. She had known something was wrong the moment the door wouldn't open. Not stuck, not jammed, but held as if someone had pressed a firm, unyielding palm against it from the other side. Kaylee was 74, and her hearing wasn't what it used to be. But even with the murmur of age in her ears, she could tell the difference between an old hinge complaining and wood meeting something solid, something deliberate. She pushed harder. A slow, steady pressure that engaged the deep muscles of her shoulder muscles honed by decades of chores and lifting, yet the door remained immovable. For a second, the thought cold as an autumn draft brushed her mind. Is it my own body betraying me? Her joints had a way of locking up at the most inconvenient moments, a silent rebellion against the passage of time. But then she leaned in closer, pressing her ear against the cool painted panel, and felt the faint vibration of metal. Not the familiar creak of a hinge, but the distinct, sharp resonance of a nail. More than one. Panic at her age was a wasteful emotion. It consumed breath, and breath was a precious thing. Instead, she stepped back, letting the sudden heavy silence settle around her. The house sounded wrong. Houses like people had their own unique breathing. The low hum of an ancient refrigerator in the kitchen, the settling sigh of old beams beneath the roof, the gentle current of warm air rising through the stairwell. But the air in her bedroom felt thick, too, still as if it too were listening, holding its breath with her. Then the smell reached her. Not the clean, comforting scent of hearth smoke drifting in from a neighbour's chimney, but the heavy, sour bite of something starting to burn where it shouldn't. It was the acrid perfume of destruction, a herald of unseen ruin. Kaylee moved to the window. The frame was old, painted too many times a thick skin of history, but the lock still worked. She lifted the latch, feeling the sticky resistance that came from years of being undisturbed. Before opening it fully, she glanced back at the bedroom door. The smoke was creeping in now, a thin grey line snaking under the gap at the bottom. It moved with an unnerving purpose, like a living thing seeking egress, or perhaps searching for a target. Smoke, she thought, always tells the truth. She took the wooden chair from her vanity table. It wasn't much. Her late husband, Edward, had bought it 40 years ago, believing she'd appreciate something elegant for her dressing rituals. It had a carved back and slender legs, never designed for violence. Still, Kaylee held it with both hands, lifted it to shoulder height, and swung. The first hit cracked the glass, a spider web, spreading outward from the point of impact. The second made a hole, a gaping maw in the pane. The third broke through completely, sending shards crashing onto the clipped lawn outside. A few pieces, sharp as a winter's promise, cut her forearm, but the sting felt distant, as if it belonged to another body, another self. Cold, clean air rushed in, and with it the real sound of the fire, the low, hungry hum of wood, beginning to surrender of plaster, crumbling of decades, turning to ash. She leaned out. The drop wasn't far. But at her age, even a small fall could steal months of mobility, leaving a person marooned in their own bones. So she sat on the windowsill first, sliding one leg over, then the other, lowering herself until her worn boots touched the narrow strip of damp earth below. Her knees trembled a silent protest, but they held. When she straightened up, brushing glass from her sleeves, she looked toward the lawn, and there she was. Genevieve. Kaylee's daughter stood near the trimmed hedge. Her phone raised the small red recording light, blinking like a single malignant heartbeat. Genevieve's free hand was lifted halfway, as if she intended to run toward Kaylee. but she didn't move. She only looked, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, breath steady, too steady. She didn't utter "mother." She didn't say anything at all. Behind Kaylee, the bedroom window glowed an angry orange, a baleful eye in the darkening house. Smoke puffed out around her like an accusation clinging to her hair, her clothes a shroud of foul intent. Somewhere down the street, a siren began to wail, growing louder, closer. But the world around them, the meticulously kept lawn, the neatly sculpted hedge, Genevieve's still pale face, remained strangely, horrifyingly calm. Genevieve lowered the phone a fraction, just enough for Kaylee to see the expression her daughter was trying to hide. Not shock, not relief. Annoyance. As if Kaylee had ruined something carefully planned, meticulously orchestrated. Kaylee took a step forward, feeling the damp earth sink a little under her shoes. The sirens grew louder, a chorus of approaching truth. Genevieve looked away, then back at Kaylee, then down at her phone. Her hand shook once a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor quickly steadied. Kaylee didn't ask her a thing. At 74, with the smell of smoke still clinging to her hair, a mother knew when the truth would not be spoken out loud. Instead, Kaylee just stood there, breathing deep, letting the cold night air fill her lungs. It tasted cleaner than anything inside that house. And she understood without anyone telling her that nothing about tonight had gone wrong. Everything had gone exactly as someone intended. And she wasn't supposed to be standing here at all. She didn't call out to Genevieve. At her age, Kaylee had learned the power of silence. It settled in places where words only rattled uselessly. The fire behind her crackled louder, finding something new to chew on in the hallway. The smoke rising from the broken window trailed upward like a thin grey ribbon drifting into the deepening night sky. Genevieve finally lowered the phone all the way, but she didn't step forward. She just stared at Kaylee, her brows knitted as if she couldn't decide whether to pretend to be relieved or genuinely angry. The phone screen, a cold blue rectangle, cast an unnatural glow on her face. She turned it off slowly, pressing her thumb to the screen longer than necessary, as though performing for an unseen audience. "You're out," Genevieve said at last. Her voice small, not shaken, just surprised. Annoyed, even. "I didn't think—" She stopped herself. Not the right sentence, apparently. Kaylee took another step toward her, careful on the uneven lawn. Her legs felt stiff from the climb through the window. Her palms still stung where glass had cut into them, but her breath was steady. And that steadiness, Kaylee realized, frightened Genevieve more than any scream could have. She saw it in the way Genevieve shifted her weight back, as if something in Kaylee had grown taller in the last few minutes, more formidable. "Mother!" Genevieve tried again this time, with a tremble she probably practiced for the camera. "Thank God you're safe. I was going to run in, but the door was nailed shut," Kaylee finished for her, her voice calm, as if she were discussing the unusual spring weather. "An odd thing to do in your own home." Genevieve's lips parted. No words came out. For a moment she looked like a child, caught with stolen candy, trying to decide whether to lie or to cry. Before she could choose, the first fire engine turned the corner. The red lights bounced across the yard, spilling over the two of them like a stark, urgent warning. Genevieve stiffened. Kaylee watched her straighten her shoulders, pull her perfectly coiffed hair behind one ear, and arrange a face like one she had rehearsed in the mirror. She wasn't preparing to help Kaylee. She was preparing her story. The engine stopped in front of the burning house. Firefighters, men and women in heavy soot-stained gear, jumped out, shouting instructions to each other. One of them, a young man with kind eyes, ran toward them. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" he asked, looking at Kaylee directly, his voice tight with concern. "I'm not," Kaylee replied. "I was inside. The window was the only way out." He blinked, taken aback. The door wouldn't open," Kaylee said. It was nailed. The firefighter turned sharply toward Genevieve. People who lived through smoke had a certain steadiness in their voices, a clarity forged by peril. People who lied even subtly often shook without realizing it. Genevieve's hands were trembling again, a telltale flutter. She stepped forward, forcing a small, breathy sob. "Mother must have been confused," she said quickly, her words rushing out like water from a burst pipe. "She's been tired lately. I think she panicked. It must have just stuck." "Stuck doors don't have fresh nails in them," Kaylee said quietly, her gaze never leaving Genevieve's. The firefighter glanced between them, but didn't push further. They had flames to fight. Another man in heavy gear approached, guiding Genevieve away, so they could work his attention focused solely on the inferno. Genevieve let him pull her aside, still glancing at Kaylee over her shoulder, as if measuring how much Kaylee would say, how much she knew. A hose roared to life, a hungry beast unleashed. Water hit the house in a hard white arc. Smoke burst from the roof, a dark exhalation of defeat. Kaylee watched calmly, the way one watches rain when they already know everything that matters has gotten wet. After a few minutes, a uniformed fire captain, a man with a stern face and a moustache, damp with sweat and mist, came over. "Mrs. Hale," he said, using her late husband's surname, Captain Sterling. He asked the usual questions. Was she alone inside? Did she hear anything strange? Did she smell smoke before the fire alarm went off? "There was no alarm," Kaylee said. "And I told you the door was nailed." He looked up at the house, then back at her, then at Genevieve, who was standing off to the side. Arms crossed tight against her chest, pretending to shiver from the cold, although the night was unseasonably warm. "We'll need to take a look at that door when the flames are out," Captain Sterling said, his voice flat with official suspicion. "Yes," Kaylee replied, her voice equally flat. "You should." The captain paused, studying Kaylee's face. She thought he expected panic or confusion, but found neither. Instead, he found a woman who had already done her panicking decades ago when her Edward died, and she learned that fear does nothing but tire the lungs and cloud the mind. He lowered his voice, a professional courtesy. "Are you safe to stand here? Do you need medical attention?" "No," Kaylee said softly. "I'm all right." Behind him, the glow through her bedroom window began to dim as the water took hold. The house was wounded, but not lost. A pity, Kaylee thought. Genevieve probably hoped for ashes. "I want to see the door once it's safe," Kaylee said. Captain Sterling nodded and walked back toward his team. Genevieve approached Kaylee tentatively, as if the air around her mother was suddenly dangerous. She pulled a scratchy blanket from a medic's hands and draped it over Kaylee's shoulders, a theatrical gesture for the benefit of the onlookers. "Mother, listen," Genevieve whispered sharply. Her teeth clenched around the feigned softness she pretended to offer. "Don't say things like that. You're confused. Smoke can—" "Genevieve," Kaylee said, looking straight at her daughter, her gaze unwavering. "I wasn't supposed to survive tonight, was I?" Genevieve's face changed. Not dramatically, she wasn't foolish enough for that. But just a flicker. A tightening around the eyes, a brief, almost imperceptible hardening of her jaw. "No," she said too quickly, shaking her head. "Of course not. How can you even—" But her voice cracked on the last word. A crack just like the window Kaylee thought. Just like her plan. And suddenly, Kaylee knew with absolute clarity that what she had escaped wasn't just a fire. It was her own child's belief that Kaylee no longer mattered, that her existence was an inconvenience, an obstacle. And that knowledge, more than the flames, chilled Kaylee to the bone. The fire was mostly out by the time they let Kaylee move closer. The air still smelled sharp and dirty. The kind of smoke that clung to the back of her throat and stayed there even after she drank water. She wrapped the blanket tighter around her, less for warmth than for something to do with her hands, They were still trembling, not from fear, but from the strain of holding herself steady, of maintaining a composure that was a fragile shield against the chaos. A young paramedic, fresh-faced and earnest, came over with a flashlight and asked to check her oxygen levels. Kaylee let him. She had learned over the years that fighting kindness only made it awkward. His hands were gentle, his voice calm, a small oasis of genuine concern in the orchestrated drama. When he finished, he nodded approvingly. "You're lucky," he said. "Most people trapped inside a burning house don't get out fast enough." Kaylee didn't answer. She wasn't interested in talking about luck. Behind him, a cluster of firefighters carried out what was left of her bedroom door. It looked obscene in the open air, a private thing ripped from where it belonged, exposing its violated intimacy. Kaylee stepped toward it slowly until Captain Sterling noticed and walked over. "Ma'am, don't get too close. There are exposed nails." "I'd like to see them," Kaylee said, her voice clear, resolute. He hesitated only a second before nodding. "All right, just watch your step." The door lay on the grass like a wounded animal. The wood was blackened around the edges, a testament to the fire's veracity. But the center was intact enough to show the undeniable truth. 3 nails driven in from the outside at an angle no carpenter would use stood out like accusations. Fresh silver metal, bright under the floodlights, too new to have ever belonged to this old house, glinted defiantly. Captain Sterling crouched beside it and traced a gloved finger along one of the nails. "This wasn't accidental," he said, his voice low, firm. "Someone sealed it recently. Within hours, not days." Genevieve heard him. She turned her back to them, pretending to talk to one of the insurance men who had arrived. Kaylee noted far too early for this to be coincidence. Her voice was sharp, low, strained, a desperate attempt at normalcy. The captain rose and faced Kaylee. "Mrs. Hale, you said you were alone inside." "I was," Kaylee answered, "and no one else had access to the house tonight." Kaylee looked at him, at his calm, steady eyes, at the soot on his helmet, at the streak of sweat drying on the side of his face. This man had seen worse than her truth. "My daughter was here," she said, her voice even. "She told me to rest, said she'd take care of some things in the hallway. Then she stepped out, and not long after I smelled smoke." He took that in with a slow breath. Not surprised, not shocked, just thoughtful, as if fitting a final piece into a complex puzzle. "Would you be willing to speak with the fire investigator?" he asked. "Yes. Now. Yes." There was no need to think. Some doors you opened before you gave yourself time to hesitate, before the instinct for self-preservation could be dulled by doubt. A tall man in a dark jacket approached. He introduced himself as Detective Thorne, but his name slipped past Kaylee. Not because she didn't hear it, but because names often didn't matter when someone's job was to listen to the worst parts of your life, to record the threads of betrayal. He pulled out a small notebook and a pen. "Mrs. Hale, tell me everything exactly as it happened." So she did. Not dramatically, not with a trembling voice or wide, frantic eyes, but steadily, the way one reads instructions for something fragile. She told him about the door, the nails, the smoke, the window, the chair, the fall, and finally about seeing Genevieve on the lawn, filming. When she mentioned the phone, Detective Thorne's pen paused. "Filming?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Yes." "Was she calling for help?" "No." She was pointed at the house. "Was she calling your name?" "No." He didn't look up from the notebook, but Kaylee felt the shift in the air. A small, almost imperceptible tightening like a knot forming in a rope. "And did she assist you once you were outside?" he asked. "No." "No attempt to approach you, support you, check your injuries?" "No." Only then did he lift his eyes. They were steady, unreadable. But in their depths, Kaylee sensed a flicker of something, a dawning comprehension. Is there any reason your daughter would benefit from an accident occurring tonight? Kaylee took a breath. At 74 breaths came slower, fuller, each one a small victory. She let hers settle before answering. She has talked about the house, Kaylee said, a lot. About insurance, about needing space, about needing money, about how I shouldn't be living alone at my age. Any financial conflicts? Not conflicts, Kaylee said quietly, but expectations. He wrote that down too. Behind them, Genevieve was pacing near the hedge, arms folded tight, jaw clenched. Her phone, now lowered, hung uselessly from her fingers. She kept glancing toward them, her expression shifting from impatience to worry to anger. She looked like someone watching a dam develop cracks, feeling the tremors of its impending collapse. Detective Thorne closed his notebook. Thank you, Mrs. Hale. That was very helpful. Before Kaylee could respond, a car pulled up fast. Too fast, braking sharply. A man in a suit. His tie, crooked hair messy as if he'd dressed in a hurry, stepped out. He strode straight toward Genevieve. Kaylee recognized him. Silas, Genevieve's partner, the one who never looked Kaylee in the eye, whose presence always felt like a shadow. He whispered something harsh at Genevieve. She flinched. They argued in quick, sharp bursts too low for Kaylee to hear, but the way they kept glancing at her, Kaylee thought said enough. Another firefighter approached. Captain Sterling murmured something. The captain nodded, then pointed toward the burned doorway. The structure was stable enough now for closer inspection. They would find more nails, more evidence, more answers Genevieve did not want found. Detective Thorne looked at Kaylee again. We'll need you at the station tomorrow, just to formalize your statement. I'll be there, Kaylee said. He gave a respectful nod and walked away. Genevieve watched him go, her face tightening with each step he took. Then she looked at Kaylee, not with fear, not with guilt, but with something far colder, blame. As if Kaylee had ruined her evening, her meticulously crafted plan, her entire life. And standing there, blanket around her shoulders, smoke still clinging to her clothes, Kaylee understood something simple and hard. Her own daughter saw her not as a mother, but as a problem she had tried and failed to solve. The investigators didn't leave right away. They stayed long after the last flames hissed into silence, combing through the hallway with flashlights, bending down to study scorch marks touching the wood as if they were reading it like Braille. Fire left patterns. It spoke, and the men who'd spent their lives listening to it knew when it was lying and when someone else was. Kaylee stood a little distance away, watching them move through her home, careful as surgeons. The blanket around her shoulders had grown damp from the night air. Her hair smelled like smoke and old paint, but her mind was sharper than it had been in years. Fear has a way of waking up parts of you didn't know had gone to sleep. One of the investigators stepped out of the front door, holding a small metal object with a gloved hand. Even from where Kaylee stood, it gleamed under the floodlights, stark against the darkness. A nail, not charred, not old, but clean straight, recently hammered. He looked at Captain Sterling, who nodded grimly. Genevieve's partner Silas was pacing near the driveway, rubbing his temples, muttering something to her. What do you mean they're saying that? He snapped, a little too loud this time. Genevieve shot him a sharp look and hushed him, but her composure was slipping like a cheap mask in humidity. She kept glancing at the investigators, at Kaylee at the house, then back at the investigators, as if eyes could erase evidence. Captain Sterling finally approached them, wiping soot from his hands. Mrs. Hale, he said, we've confirmed what you described. The door was secured from the outside using 3 nails, fresh ones. No sign of warping or accidental sealing. Genevieve stepped forward quickly, as if pulled by an invisible string. Captain, my mother has memory issues. She began, her voice sugary but shaking slightly. She must be confused. She hasn't been herself lately. You know how age can... Kaylee looked at her, steady, silent. She didn't need to interrupt her. Genevieve interrupted herself just fine. Captain Sterling raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, the door was nailed. Anyone would have had trouble getting out. Genevieve opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes flicked toward Silas. He gave the smallest shake of his head. Stop talking. We'll need to secure the house until the investigation is complete, the captain went on. No one enters or removes anything without clearance. Genevieve's face tightened. But this is our home. My home, Kaylee said quietly. Genevieve spun around. Mother, please, this isn't the time. Oh, Kaylee said, but it was exactly the time. The captain handed Kaylee a card. We'll contact you tomorrow morning. Don't stay here. You'll need a safe place for the night. Safe, Kaylee thought. Funny word considering where she'd been an hour ago. I'll manage, she said. I always have. A pair of men in jackets marked Insurance Claims Division stepped forward next. Their timing was impeccable. Too impeccable. One of them already had a clipboard out ready to sweep the scene for details for discrepancies. Genevieve's attention snapped to them instantly. Finally, she said, urgency leaking into her voice. Listen, I need to file a claim immediately. This whole tragedy, the house... Ma'am, one of the agents interrupted, his voice smooth and professional. We'll need to review the initial findings first. What do you mean? She demanded. The agent gestured toward Detective Thorne and Captain Sterling near the broken door. We can't process anything until the fire department completes its report. There seems to be a discrepancy regarding... His voice lowered, but Kaylee knew the word he didn't finish because Genevieve's expression hardened. There is no discrepancy. It was an electrical fault. The house is old. Ask anyone. But the agent wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Kaylee. Mrs. Hale, he asked, do you know of any faulty wiring, any previous incidents, any repairs, anything that might have contributed? Kaylee shook her head. No, everything was updated last year. New breakers, new wiring. I keep all the receipts. The agent blinked. You keep receipts? Of course. At her age, people assumed you misplaced your own thoughts. They didn't expect order. They certainly didn't expect documentation. I'll bring them tomorrow, Kaylee added, a quiet challenge in her tone. Genevieve's mouth fell slightly open like someone had slapped her with a feather light but humiliating. The agent nodded respectfully. That would be very helpful. Genevieve tried to speak, but her voice caught a strangled sound. She looked at Silas again. He took her elbow and pulled her aside, whispering sharply. Kaylee watched them from the corner of her eye. She didn't want to hear their words. She wanted to hear their fear. They had expected to direct the narrative. Now they were chasing it. One of the younger firefighters stepped toward Kaylee with a gentle expression. Ma'am, we need a contact number for updates. Do you have someone who can pick you up tonight? A relative? A close friend? No, Kaylee said simply. He looked sympathetic, as if loneliness were the worst thing she'd survived tonight. But Kaylee felt no sadness at the thought. Some truths you stopped apologizing for after 70 years. I'll call a cab, she said. Genevieve spun around. Mother, you don't need a cab. You can stay at my place. It's late and you... No, Kaylee said. I'm fine, but... No. Genevieve took a step toward her, trying to soften her voice. Mother, please, you're shaking. I got out of a burn-in house, Kaylee said, her voice dry as kindling. I'm entitled to shake. Genevieve's face froze at that. The firefighters pretended not to hear. The insurance men kept their eyes on their clipboards, but their pens paused. Silas muttered something under his breath. Genevieve elbowed him a sharp, angry gesture. Captain Sterling approached again. Mrs. Hale, once you've found a place to stay, get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. Tomorrow. Tomorrow meant statements, reports, Questions, answers, evidence, truths that had been waiting years to come into daylight. "I'll be ready," Kaylee said. When she turned toward the street, the night felt wider than she remembered, the air cleaner, the space around her larger. And behind her daughter watched like someone seeing a door close that she needed desperately to keep open. Only now she had no hammer, and Kaylee had no intention of ever letting her board up her life again. The motel room was small, smelling faintly of disinfectant and stale cigarette smoke, with thin carpet and a rattling heater that groaned a perpetual complaint. But the silence inside it felt cleaner than anything Kaylee had heard in years. No footsteps running toward her with demands, no voices calling her name only when they needed something. No palpable tension, no pretense, no daughter rehearsing her next performance in the quiet hours. Kaylee sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, letting her hands rest on her knees. They were still scratched from the glass, small, angry lines crisscrossing her skin, but the bleeding had stopped. The skin around the cuts looked swollen and angry, yet Kaylee herself felt strangely, profoundly calm. Her body, she often mused, reacted louder than she did these days. She didn't turn on the television, a relic with a perpetually blurry screen. She didn't take off her shoes. She just sat there, listening to the monotonous hum of the heater and the occasional distant rumble of a car passing on the highway outside. Anyone looking at her might have thought she was in shock, a fragile old woman overwhelmed by trauma. But shock, Kaylee knew, felt like an emptiness, a hollow ache. What she felt was the opposite. Everything inside her felt painfully, sharply awake. She replayed the night, slowly, piece by piece, but not the fire itself. Not the heat, or the smoke, or even the nails. What she kept hearing over and over was the stillness on Genevieve's face when she watched Kaylee crawl out of that window. The chilling, almost placid look of someone watching a mistake ruin a plan. Kaylee thought of all the times Genevieve had told her with a saccharine sweetness that now tasted like ash, "Mother, you need to trust me," and how often trust was the one thing Genevieve didn't deserve. Kaylee pulled her small, sturdy travel bag onto the bed. She'd grabbed it quickly, an instinctual move on her way out of the house earlier that evening, before Genevieve had told her to rest for a while. Funny how simple decisions made on a whim sometimes turned out to matter the most. Inside the bag were only essentials: a nightgown, a toothbrush, a small bottle of lavender lotion, and her wallet. She unzipped the worn leather of her wallet and looked at the photograph tucked inside. Edward, her late husband, a man whose quiet strength still resonated in her memory. He was standing in front of their old repair shop, the Hale & Sons Motor Works. One hand on his hip, the other shielding his eyes from the harsh Montana sun. He always squinted a little too much in pictures, as if he couldn't quite believe the world was bright enough to require it. "You'd know exactly what to do, wouldn't you, my love?" Kaylee whispered the words, tasting of salt and memory. The heater rattled louder for a moment, as if answering a ghostly affirmation. She placed the photo on the nightstand, its worn edges a testament to decades of being cherished, and lay back against the pillows. They were flat, like someone had ironed them on purpose, offering little comfort. But she didn't mind. She stared at the ceiling, tracing the faint, curling water stains that spread like old tree branches. Her body felt heavy, bruised by the night's ordeal, but there was no urge to sleep. Instead, there was a slow, growing anger, not hot and wild like the fire. This was something older and quieter. Something that had been pushed down for so many years, it had learned to live in the cracks of her ribs, an enduring ache. It spread through her with a clarity that almost steadied her heartbeat. Not anger at the fire, not even at the attempted betrayal, but anger at herself, at all the excuses she'd made for Genevieve, at the little hurts she'd brushed aside, the small deceits she'd quietly overlooked. At the times she told herself Genevieve was just stressed or just overwhelmed, or just going through a difficult phase. How long? Kaylee wondered. Is a phase allowed to last before the truth stops being polite? She remembered how Genevieve used to come over only after she heard Kaylee had sold the repair shop. The place Edward had built, the place that had been Kaylee's anchor for 40 years. How Genevieve had suddenly insisted on managing Kaylee's bills, her mail, her appointments, weaving a net of helpfulness that now felt like a cage. How she kept telling Kaylee to leave things to her, but always kept the explanations vague, obfuscating the details. All those times Kaylee had chosen to stay quiet to avoid conflict, because she didn't want to lose Genevieve completely, didn't want to sever the fragile thread of their connection. But the thing no one tells you about silence, Kaylee reflected, is that it doesn't protect you. It only teaches others how much they can get away with. A soft knock at the motel door startled her. Her heart jumped harder than it should have, a sudden flutter against her ribs. She sat up slowly, cautiously. "Mrs. Hale," a voice called. Kaylee opened the door a crack. Detective Thorne stood there holding a small paper bag and a thermos, his expression kind but professional. "I figured you might not have eaten," he said, offering a small apologetic smile. The diner down the road was still open. "Got you some soup." Kaylee stared at him, surprised by the unexpected gesture. "That's very kind," she managed. He shrugged, a gesture of casual generosity. "You've had a long night. Thought you shouldn't face it on an empty stomach." He handed her the bag and thermos. The warm, savory smell of chicken noodle soup drifted out, a comforting aroma in the sterile motel air. "Try to get some rest," he said, his voice gentle. "Tomorrow we'll sort through everything." Sort through everything. If only he knew that everything stretched far beyond tonight's flames. When he left, Kaylee set the soup on the small chipped table but didn't eat it yet. Instead, she walked to the small motel bathroom and turned on the stark fluorescent light. The mirror was cracked in the corner, distorting her reflection a little, adding a strange, fractured quality to her image. She leaned in closer, studying the woman looking back at her. Her hair still smelled of smoke. Her cheeks were pale, drawn. Her eyes were not frightened. They were tired. Yes, hurt, betrayed. But they weren't afraid. "Is this what it took?" Kaylee whispered to her reflection, the words barely audible. "For me to finally see my own child clearly." The faucet dripped steadily, each drop marking the small, quiet distance between who she had been and who she would have to become if she wanted to protect herself, if she wanted to reclaim her life. She went back to the bed and finally took a sip of the soup. It was too salty, but warm. It reminded her she was still here, still breathing. She lay down and closed her eyes. Not to sleep. Sleep would not come, not yet. But to gather strength to let the resolve she felt solidify, because tomorrow wasn't just another day. Tomorrow was the day she stopped pretending that a mother's love was enough to make a daughter honorable, and the day she stopped confusing duty with sacrifice. And for the first time in years, as the soup warmed her chest, and the night settled around her, she felt a thin, fragile thread of something she thought she had lost. Resolve. Morning came too early, with a thin strip of grey light, slipping past the flimsy curtains and settling on the carpet like dust. Kaylee hadn't slept. She must have closed her eyes a few times, perhaps drifted in and out of a shallow, uneasy slumber. But every sound, the heater switching off with a metallic clunk, a truck passing outside, someone walking past the room, pulled her straight back to awareness, to the sharp, clear edge of her new reality. Still, when she sat up, her mind felt strangely clear, as if the ashes of yesterday had settled into something solid, something immutable. She took a slow, deliberate breath and reached for her purse. The business card Captain Sterling had given her lay inside next to her reading glasses and a single carefully hoarded peppermint candy she'd been saving for months. Beneath that was her old metal keyring. Not just keys, but tiny, silent reminders of a life she'd tried to keep orderly, meticulously catalogued. The shop key from decades ago, still a comforting weight. Her house key for a house that was now a crime scene. And the tiny, safe deposit box key with its sharp, precise edges. That was the one she needed today. The motel coffee tasted like burnt cardboard, acrid and bitter, but it was hot. And at Kaylee's age, hot often mattered more than flavour. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders again, a thin barrier against the lingering chill, and sat for a moment letting the warmth permeate her before standing. She braced herself on the nightstand, not from weakness, but from a lifetime of moving carefully, deliberately, of respecting the mechanics of her own body. Then she picked up her purse and walked out. The morning air felt colder than it should have, biting at her exposed skin. Maybe that was just her body trying to adjust to register the starkness of a world irrevocably changed. The cab driver didn't talk much, fine by Kaylee. He dropped her off in front of the Bank of Sterling, a formidable building with polished glass doors, and a tidy row of meticulously trimmed shrubs out front, too neat, too pristine to match the turbulent weight of what Kaylee carried inside. Inside, the receptionist, a young woman with a polite smile, recognized her. "Good morning, Mrs. Hale. Do you need access to your box today?" "Yes," Kaylee said. "I do." She nodded politely, not knowing Kaylee thought how profound that simple errand had become. The vault room was always cold, the air crisp and still a sanctuary of secrets. Kaylee sat at one of the small metal tables and placed the safe deposit box, a sturdy steel rectangle, in front of her. When she opened it, the faint, dry smell of old paper and aged metal rose, a quiet smell like secrets that had waited too long to be heard. Inside were envelopes, folders, old receipts, the kinds of things most people threw away without a second thought, dismissing them as clutter. But Kaylee wasn't most people. She had kept everything Edward and she had ever signed together. The original deed to the house, the sale papers for their beloved repair shop, meticulously detailed insurance forms, bank statements going back decades, letters from the bank showing every significant transfer she ever made, none of which Genevieve had bothered to ask about, assuming Kaylee's mind was as fragile as her perceived old age. Genevieve thought Kaylee forgot things. She thought age meant confusion, a slow erosion of faculties. She never understood that Kaylee forgot people far sooner than she forgot paperwork, that her memory for figures and facts was as sharp as ever. Kaylee opened the folder with the shop sale documents. Edward and she had worked in that place for 40 years, built it from a dusty garage into a pillar of the community. Her name, alongside his, was on every single contract. When she sold it after his death, a decision made with a heavy heart but a clear mind, she kept a full copy, legally notarized, properly sealed, a monument to their shared history. Genevieve had always assumed the money from that sale was already gone squandered on daily expenses or medical care. She never asked how much remained. She never asked where it was. She only hinted here and there that an accident could simplify things, could speed up the inheritance she felt entitled to. And now Kaylee knew Genevieve understood that accidents left traces, especially when they were manufactured. Kaylee pulled out another envelope, one Genevieve didn't know existed. Her updated homeowner's insurance policy signed just last spring. She remembered the agent's words, his reassuring tone. "You're fully covered, Mrs. Hale. Just keep these documents safe." Safe. He would be proud, Kaylee thought, of how literally she had taken that advice. A quiet knock on the vault doorframe made Kaylee look up. It was Mr. Jennings, the branch manager. He'd known her since she was a young wife, bringing in rolled coins to deposit from the shop's first meager earnings, a hopeful future in her hands. "Mrs. Hale," he said gently, his voice soft in the cold air. Detective Thorne called. He said you might come today. He asked me to make sure you had access to anything you needed. Thank you, Kaylee said, a lump forming in her throat. He hesitated, then added, his gaze troubled. I'm sorry about your daughter. Kaylee closed the folder, slowly, deliberately. Everyone is, she said, her voice raspy. Except her. He didn't ask more. He simply walked away, giving her the dignity of silence, the space to mourn a living loss. Kaylee gathered the documents into neat stacks. Her hands shook a little, not from fear, but from the immense weight of what she was doing, what she knew she had to do next. Genevieve had spent years assuming Kaylee was weak. That age had worn her down. That grief had made her soft, pliable. But age was not softness. It was study. It was memory. It was the long, slow gathering of truths others hoped you'd forgotten. When she closed the box and stood, her knees protested with a small ache, but her resolve didn't. She walked out of the bank with the documents secure in her purse, feeling their weight, like armor, a tangible defense against the insidious machinations of her daughter. There was one more stop she needed to make today. The lawyer, who still addressed her as Mrs. Hale, not mother, not dear, not sweetheart. A man who dealt with facts, not guilt, not sentiment. And for the first time in a very long time, Kaylee was ready to deal in facts too. Andrew Malone's office was in a 2-story brick building near the courthouse, a place that felt solid, enduring. The kind of place where the floors creaked just enough to remind you they'd been walked on by decades of people with problems, with injustices, with lives that needed untangling. Kaylee had known Andrew since he was a young associate fresh out of law school with too much unruly hair and not quite enough patience. Now he was in his 60s, greyer, a bit slower in his movements, but far sharper than anyone gave him credit for. Life, Kaylee knew, had a way of doing that to the observant ones. Kaylee took the elevator. Her knees weren't in the mood for stairs. And when the doors opened with a soft sigh, his secretary, a woman named Beatrice with a kindly face, looked up and gave her a sympathetic smile. Mrs. Hale, he's expecting you. Of course he was. Kaylee had left a message at dawn. Her voice, she suspected, must have carried something unusual in it. A subtle undertone of unwavering intent, because he had told Beatrice to clear his morning schedule. His office door was open. He stood when Kaylee entered, smoothing down the front of his worn tweed suit jacket, a gesture of quiet formality. Kaylee, he said, using her first name. And there was no pity in his tone, just respect. Sit. Tell me everything. It was strange, Kaylee reflected, how hard it was to begin telling the unvarnished truth. After years of telling yourself something gentler, something easier to bear. She folded her hands in her lap, feeling the faint sting of the cuts on her palms, small reminders of the night. Andrew noticed them immediately. That from the fire? He asked, his gaze direct. Yes. He nodded slowly, as if storing that detail somewhere important, a piece of crucial evidence in the unfolding narrative. When Kaylee finally began describing the night, the nails, the smoke, the desperate scramble through the window, the chilling sight of Genevieve on the lawn phone in hand, he didn't interrupt. His eyes didn't widen in shock. His jaw didn't clench in outrage. He just listened, his pen moving quietly, methodically across a yellow legal pad, capturing every detail. When Kaylee finished, the room was silent, save for the soft tick of a grandfather clock in the corner. Andrew set the pen down gently. Kaylee, he said, his voice grave, your daughter tried to kill you. The sentence didn't hit Kaylee like a blow. She had lived through the blow already. This was simply the name for it, the stark, clinical truth. Yes, Kaylee said, her voice steady. He breathed out once sharply. The fire department's initial report will confirm forced confinement. The insurance investigation is already raising flags. This isn't speculation, Kaylee. This is a criminal act. He said it plainly, not dramatically, just stating facts. And somehow that helped. Truth didn't always need volume. Sometimes it only needed air, the space to exist in its raw, undeniable form. Kaylee reached into her purse and placed the documents from the bank on his polished mahogany desk. He adjusted his spectacles and spread them out, a meticulous array of paper. "You kept everything," he murmured, almost admiringly. "I always do." He studied the deed, the shop sale contracts, the insurance policies. He pushed aside the old bank statements, then pulled them back, rereading dates, cross-referencing figures in his mind. "This," he said, finally tapping the updated insurance policy with his finger, "is especially important. If Genevieve was trying to stage an accident for financial gain, this proves she didn't understand your actual coverage, your financial robustness. That strengthens your case considerably." "My case?" Kaylee repeated the words, feeling alien on her tongue. His gaze softened slightly. "Yes, Kaylee. You have a case now, and we're not going to let her twist this into anything else. We're going to hold her accountable." Kaylee sat a little straighter in her chair. The heater in his office hummed softly, a comforting background drone. Outside, a bird tapped once on the window, a small, hopeful sound. Everything felt strangely, reassuringly steady. "What do I need to do?" she asked. He slid a fresh sheet of paper toward her. "2 things. First, a formal statement to the police. I'll help you structure it. Make sure it's legally sound. Second, we update your legal protections power of attorney will trust arrangements if you choose. For your own security," he added gently, his eyes holding hers, "you should consider limiting Genevieve's access to you. No unsupervised visits, no handling your mail or accounts, no keys." "She hasn't had a key in years," Kaylee said, a faint bitter smile touching her lips. She took it away from herself with her constant demands. He gave a small, dry smile in return. "Good." He began drafting the revised documents, his handwriting sharp and deliberate, the careful script of a seasoned professional. Kaylee watched his pen move across the page, each stroke tightening the boundaries around the life she had unwittingly allowed Genevieve to walk through for too long to encroach upon. At one point, he paused, looking up at her. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Kaylee?" "It will be difficult." "I'm 74, Kaylee replied, her voice steady, unwavering. "If not now, when?" He nodded once firmly. "Then we proceed." They spent the next hour outlining the next steps appointments, with detectives' formal statements, updated protections. Not one part of it frightened Kaylee. A strange thing happened, she realized, when the worst moment of your life had already passed. You stopped fearing paperwork. When everything was signed for the day, Andrew leaned back in his chair, a slight sigh escaping him. "Kaylee," he said quietly, his voice tinged with genuine concern. "I've known you a long time. You've always tried to keep peace in your family, to maintain harmony, but this wasn't a family problem. This was survival. I'm glad you came to me." "So am I," Kaylee said, rising from her chair and walking out into the late morning sun. The cold air touched her face like a crisp, invigorating reminder of her newfound clarity. She held her purse close, feeling the weight of the papers inside, a testament to her agency. For the first time in years, her steps felt heavier but steadier, like each one had a specific, deliberate purpose. She didn't know what Genevieve was doing right now, panicking, planning, desperately rewriting her crumbling story. But it no longer mattered. For the first time, Kaylee wasn't walking into Genevieve's version of events. She was walking into her own. Chapter. Kaylee didn't go back to the motel after leaving Andrew's office. She couldn't make herself walk into that small, impersonal room again, not with her head filled the way it was teeming with plans and resolutions. Instead, she found a bench across from the courthouse under a bare tree, whose skeletal branches scratched lightly against the brisk autumn wind. She sat there for a long time, watching people pass, hurrying, talking into phones, carrying folders, their faces etched with their own worries, their own hurried purposes. Everyone, Kaylee thought, wrapped in their private dramas. She was thinking of Genevieve, yes, but not with the old ache, the familiar pang of disappointment. There was no room left for the soft excuses she'd been feeding herself for years, the gentle narratives she'd constructed to explain away her daughter's grasping nature. What took their place wasn't anger, not the searing, consuming kind. It was clarity. A thin, cold kind, the kind that didn't tremble. Her phone buzzed. For a moment, Kaylee almost didn't look. She assumed it was Genevieve or Silas, or one of the numbers she didn't recognize that had been trying to reach her since the morning a relentless barrage of digital demands. But when she finally glanced at the screen, her chest loosened a little, a small sigh of relief escaping her. It was Emily, her granddaughter, a beacon of genuine concern. Her message was simple, direct. "Grandma, can I come see you?" Kaylee typed back her fingers, a little stiff, but sure. "Yes, tell me where you are." Emily arrived 20 minutes later, walking quickly, her long, dark coat flapping in the wind like a sail. Her hair, usually pinned tidy, had come loose in strands around her face, framing eyes that looked worried but not afraid. When she spotted Kaylee on the bench, she broke into a half-run, her breath puffing out in small clouds in the cold air. "Grandma," she breathed, sitting beside Kaylee without asking her presence a warm, comforting weight. "Are you okay? I came as soon as—" She paused, catching her breath, her gaze searching Kaylee's face for answers. "I've heard things. Dad's talking to Mum. People are saying you were trapped." Her voice wavered on the last word, uncertainty coloring it. "You heard correctly," Kaylee said, her voice steady. Emily shut her eyes tight for a moment, as if bracing herself against an unseen blow. Then she opened them again, her gaze unwavering. "I knew something was wrong," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustle of leaves. "Mum's been acting strange for weeks, and yesterday—" She swallowed hard. "Yesterday she told me you were tired, that I shouldn't bother you. But the way she said it, I didn't believe her." Kaylee watched her fingers twist together, a nervous habit she'd had since she was a little girl, a silent indicator of her distress. "I'm sorry," Emily said, suddenly her voice thick with regret. "I should have checked on you. I should have—" "You couldn't have stopped it," Kaylee said, placing a hand gently on Emily's arm. "And you're here now." Emily nodded, wiping her cheek quickly with the back of her hand, pretending it was just the wind, not a stray tear. "Grandma," she said quietly, her voice gaining a new firm edge. "They're lying. They're trying to make it sound like it was an accident. But I saw messages on Mum's phone." Kaylee's breath caught not sharply, not with shock, but with a kind of resigned confirmation, the last piece of a terrible puzzle clicking into place. Emily hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket. "She leaves her phone around sometimes," she said, her voice tight with a betrayal that was not her own. "She thinks I don't notice anything." Her voice tightened further. "But she talks about the house, about how she's waiting on paperwork, about how it would all be easier once things were settled." She handed Kaylee her phone. Kaylee didn't scroll. She didn't need to. The preview of the last message was enough, a digital dagger to the heart. "Silas, everything is ready. After tonight we can finally breathe." Kaylee gave the phone back gently. Emily pulled her coat tighter around herself, as if the world had grown colder in the last few minutes, as if the knowledge she carried was a chill to her very bones. "I didn't want to believe it," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "But last night, after I heard about the fire, I knew." Her voice broke on the last word, dissolving into a choked sob. Kaylee placed her hand over Emily's. Her fingers were cold, but they didn't pull away. "What's going to happen now?" Emily asked, her voice small. "An investigation," Kaylee said. "Statements, paperwork, truth." Emily nodded, but her shoulders sank, weighed down by the enormity of it all. "Dad's not himself anymore," she said softly. "He listens to her. He believes everything she says." "I know," Kaylee said, her voice laced with understanding. "I don't want to lose you," Emily said, suddenly looking at Kaylee with wide, pleading eyes. "Not to them. Not to any of this. You won't," Kaylee answered, pulling Emily closer, letting her rest her head gently against Kaylee's shoulder, the way she used to when she was a little girl, afraid of thunderstorms. "I let her." Kaylee thought, maybe I needed it as much as she did. After a long silence, Emily sat up and looked at Kaylee with a steadiness that felt far older than her 19 years, a quiet strength emerging. "Whatever you need," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "I'm with you." Kaylee believed her because Emily wasn't saying it out of guilt or fear or calculation. She was saying it because she still understood what family was supposed to mean, what loyalty truly entailed. And in that moment, on a cold bench across from the courthouse, Kaylee realized something simple and painful. She hadn't lost everything. Just the parts that were already gone, long before the fire ever touched her door. Long before Genevieve's malice became undeniable. By late afternoon, the cold had settled deep into Kaylee's bones, the kind that didn't leave, even after you warmed your hands. Emily insisted on driving her back to the motel. She stayed until she saw Kaylee unlock the door, then hugged her tightly, a fierce, protective embrace, before heading home. Kaylee watched her car pull away, the taillights fading into the muted grey of the evening. For a moment, she let herself breathe, just one quiet, solitary breath. But peace Kaylee knew never lasted long when someone else was panicking. It started with a rapid knock on the door, too harsh, too frantic to belong to a stranger, too familiar to ignore. Kaylee didn't move at first. Then the knock came again, louder, more insistent, and a voice followed, sharp with desperation. "Mother." Mother opened the door. "Genevieve." The voice of someone who hadn't come to apologize, but to salvage whatever pieces of her crumbling plan she could still grab, to frantically reassemble a narrative that was already falling apart. Kaylee opened the door only halfway, keeping her body a barrier. Genevieve pushed lightly against it, as if she expected Kaylee to let her in by instinct alone, by the ingrained habits of motherhood. "I've been calling you all day," Genevieve said, her breath uneven, ragged. "Why aren't you answering your phone?" "I've been busy," Kaylee said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. Genevieve's eyes flicked over Kaylee's face, trying to read her, trying to guess how much Kaylee knew how deeply the damage had penetrated. She stepped forward again, but Kaylee kept her hand on the door, a silent, unyielding block. "Mother, please," Genevieve said, forcing a soft, cajoling tone that sounded utterly fake. "I just want to talk." The thing about softness, Kaylee thought, is that it means nothing without sincerity. Genevieve's slid off Kaylee like cheap perfume, leaving behind only the lingering scent of deceit. "Talk, then," Kaylee said, her voice still flat, holding the door ajar but unmoving. Genevieve hesitated, clearly not used to Kaylee standing in her own doorway like a gatekeeper. Not used to Kaylee blocking anything resisting her will. "Everyone's confused about what happened last night," she began quickly, a torrent of words. "The fire investigators, the insurance people, they're misunderstanding everything. I'm trying to clear things up, but it's complicated." "It seems simple to me," Kaylee said. "The door was nailed shut." Genevieve's face twitched. Just a small betrayal of emotion, but enough. "Mother, you're tired," she said, her voice dropping into a falsely gentle register. "You were probably disoriented. You know—" "I know," Kaylee said. It was the quietest interruption she'd ever made in her life, but it stopped Genevieve cold. Kaylee could see her working through her next set of lines, the way a performer flips through a script in her head, searching for the next acceptable platitude. Genevieve pressed her lips together, then tried a different angle, desperation creeping into her voice. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said, her words rushing out. "If you tell them you're not sure about the door, if you say you panicked, the insurance claim will go smoothly. We'll be able to rebuild. You'll get a new bedroom, maybe a new wing. A new wing. As if life were measured by how many rooms one could add, how much physical space one could claim." "You want me to lie?" Kaylee asked, her voice quiet but piercing. "I want you to help," Genevieve snapped, her pretense of calm shattering. "This affects all of us. All of us." Kaylee repeated, her tone chillingly precise. Genevieve winced, realizing she'd exposed more than she meant to. Her true motivations laid bare. Her voice rose brittle around the edges, verging on hysteria. "Mother, listen. If you tell them the wrong story, they could deny the claim entirely. Do you understand what that means? We'll be drowning in debt. I have bills. Silas has plans. Investments?" Kaylee asked, her gaze unwavering. "A future paid for by an insurance tragedy." Genevieve's cheeks flushed crimson. "I never said that. You didn't have to." Genevieve looked away, then blinking too fast, breathing too quickly. Kaylee could see her panic pressing against her ribs, trying to claw its way out, a desperate trapped animal. Not remorse, Kaylee noted, but the raw, unadulterated fear of losing control of her carefully constructed world, collapsing. Finally, she blurted out, "You're going to ruin everything." "I'm going to tell the truth." "That's the same thing." Genevieve whispered, her voice a defeated hiss. The hallway light flickered above her bezel. It made Genevieve look smaller, somehow less like her daughter Kaylee, and more like a stranger who had never borrowed her face or a poor infant on nest. She tried one last time, throwing a desperate plea. "Please don't do this. Not to me." That was the moment Kaylee felt something inside her shift, something that had been stiff and dormant for years. A boundary spine, a knowledge that motherhood didn't mean surrender, didn't mean complicity in one's own destruction. "I'm not doing anything to you," Kaylee said, her voice clear and firm. "You did that yourself." Genevieve's breath caught. For a second, she looked 14 again, caught lying about breaking a window. Her face a mask of caught, red-handed shame. But at 14, her shame had been real, a child's genuine remorse. This was something else entirely. She stepped back with a sharp exhale, her eyes still locked on Kaylee's, a desperate, calculating glint in their depths. "Fine. Do whatever you want, but don't expect me to fix anything for you after this. Don't expect help." Kaylee almost laughed, not out of humor, but out of the quiet, painful realization that Genevieve truly believed she had ever helped. "Good night, Genevieve," Kaylee said, her voice gentle yet firm. She closed the door, not slamming it. Slamming was for people who needed to be loud to feel strong. Kaylee stood there, hand on the knob, listening to Genevieve's footsteps retreat down the walkway, quick and angry, diminishing into the night. When silence finally settled in again, it felt lighter. Not peaceful, not yet. Peace wasn't ready for Kaylee, nor was she ready for it. But honest. And that Kaylee realized was more than enough. Jabbed. Kaylee woke early this next morning, not because she slept well. The stiff motel bed had left a permanent line down her back, but because her body had had enough of lying still. For a moment, she wasn't sure if the ache was the mattress, or the sheer weight of everything waiting outside the door, the accumulated burden of years of silent compromise. But the air was clean, and the world was quiet, and that she decided was enough to make her stand. She took a slow shower, letting the hot water soften the tightness in her shoulders, washing away not just the grime of the motel, but the lingering miasma of conflict. When she stepped outside, the cold morning hit her face with the same blunt honesty as yesterday's truth. She called a cab, and when it arrived, she asked to be taken to her house, not to go inside, but because the fire department had called. They wanted to walk her through their findings. Kaylee wasn't prepared to see the yellow tape. Somehow in the recesses of her mind, she thought they'd remove it overnight, that the physical evidence of the crime would vanish with the dawn. But there it was, stretched across her porch railing and front door, fluttering in the wind like a stark, silent warning she no longer needed. The house looked tired, wounded, but standing. A stubborn thing Kaylee thought much like herself. A small group waited by the sidewalk. Detective Thorne, Captain Sterling, and a woman with neatly pinned dark hair and a clipboard clutched to her chest. She introduced herself as Ms. Albright, a representative from the insurance company's fraud division. That explained her expression. Calm, cautious, already calculating every movement precise, economical. "Mrs. Hale," she said, her voice smooth and professional. "Thank you for coming. We want to review preliminary observations. It will help us understand what really happened." What really happened? Finally, Kaylee thought someone asked the right question. Detective Thorne led them inside. The hallway floor was covered in ash, damp in places, cracked in others. The walls were streaked with smoke, black and grey like terrible bruises, a testament to the fire's hungry embrace. Kaylee followed carefully each step, tapping gently against memories that hadn't had time to process memories now irrevocably tainted. At the end of the hallway, the detective stopped. He pointed to the charred frame of her bedroom door. "This is what concerns us most," he said. The nails were still visible, bent now, blackened by the heat, but unmistakable. The burned wood around them had receded, making them stand out like exposed bones, stark and incriminating. These nails were driven in recently. He continued, his voice devoid of speculation, focused solely on fact. Clean entry points, no corrosion. And the angle suggests they were hammered in from the outside, not by someone inside the room. Ms. Albright leaned closer, inspecting the metal with a critical eye, her brow furrowed in concentration. "How recently?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Within an hour or two before the fire began." She straightened her back, her gaze sweeping the room. "And there's no sign Mrs. Hale had tools in the room, no hammer, no nail gun." "No," Thorne said. "And even if she had, the angle would be impossible from the inside. The sheer physics wouldn't allow it." They all looked at Kaylee then, as if waiting for a reaction, tears, anger, a breakdown. But what reaction, Kaylee wondered, was left to give after you'd already lived through the worst moment of your life? "Go on," Kaylee said, her voice flat, emotionless. Thorne led them into the living room. The windows were soot-stained, opaque with grime. The curtains were gone entirely, either burned or taken for evidence. Kaylee wasn't sure. In the corner, the detective stopped again. "Mrs. Hale, do you know who this belongs to?" He pointed at the floor. A tool lay there, partially concealed by ash, a hammer. Not Kaylee's, not Edward's. New, with a distinctive rubber grip and a bright blue handle. Kaylee shook her head. "No." Ms. Albright took a photo, the flash briefly illuminating the grimy room. "This will need to be examined for prints," she stated. "A neighbour saw someone with a hammer last night," Captain Sterling added softly, his voice betraying a hint of something. Not pity, but a quiet certainty. Kaylee didn't breathe for a moment. Her heart gave a sudden hard thud against her ribs. "Who?" she asked, the single word sharp, urgent. He hesitated, then said, "Mrs. Keating. She lives across the street." Kaylee nodded. She knew Mrs. Keating. They waved from time to time, shared tomatoes from their gardens once in a while. A quiet woman, observant, with little to do but watch the comings and goings of the neighbourhood. "She says she saw your daughter and her partner carrying wood boards and a hammer into the house late yesterday afternoon." Captain Sterling finished his gaze direct, unblinking. The words hung in the air, heavy, certain solidifying into an undeniable truth. The insurance woman adjusted her glasses, her eyes narrowing slightly as if placing everything into new mental folders, recategorizing the case. "This is significant," she said carefully. "Given the circumstances, such a small word," Kaylee thought, for something so monstrous. Detective Thorne guided them back outside. The morning sun was brighter now, bouncing off the river, down the street, making the water glitter. It felt almost disrespectful. Kaylee mused how ordinary the day looked, how oblivious the world seemed to the personal inferno she had endured. "Mrs. Haelzo," Thorne said, his voice gentle but firm, "I need your permission to take a full sworn statement today. It will support the arson report, establish a clear timeline." Kaylee nodded. "Yes, we'll also recommend criminal proceedings," he added gently, his gaze unwavering, preparing her for the next step. This wasn't an accident. He didn't need to say more. Kaylee already knew. As they walked away, discussing next steps, Kaylee stayed on the sidewalk a moment longer, looking at the house that had held decades of her life. The walls were blackened, the windows broken, the smell of smoke thick in the air, a constant reminder. But underneath all that ruin was something still standing, not untouched, not unharmed, but upright, resilient, just like her. Behind her, a car door slammed. Kaylee turned. It was Genevieve's car pulling up, fast tires screeching to a halt. And from the way Genevieve stepped out, sharp movements, wild eyes, no coat despite the cold, as if her inner turmoil burned away the chill, Kaylee knew she'd heard everything, or enough of it to realize her carefully built edifice of lies was crumbling. Her panic wasn't loud. It was in the way she froze when she saw Kaylee speaking calmly with the investigators. It was in the tightness of her jaw, the barely contained tremor in her hands. And in that moment, Kaylee knew they both understood something with total painful clarity. Genevieve's story had already begun to unravel, and Kaylee's had only just begun to be told. The police station was quieter than Kaylee expected. No shouting, no slamming doors, just a low hum of printers and soft murmured conversations, like a library where the books were made of people's mistakes, their regrets, their desperate choices. They led her to a small interview room with a metal table and 2 chairs. Kaylee sat slowly, placing her purse on her lap, feeling the faint sting of the cuts on her palms when she rested them together. A detective entered a moment later, middle-aged with tired eyes that had seen too much, and a badge that looked older than his suit jacket. He greeted Kaylee politely, not with pity, and that alone made it easier to breathe. "Mrs. Hale," he said, settling across from her, his voice calm, reassuring. "I want you to know you're not a suspect. You're a victim. But I need a clear, detailed statement from you. Every single detail matters." "I'm ready," Kaylee said. And strangely, she was. He clicked on the recorder. The little red light blinked steady as a heartbeat, a small mechanical witness to the truth. Then he folded his hands on the table and waited. Kaylee spoke the way someone speaks when they're sorting linens, slowly, carefully, making sure nothing is left tangled, no wrinkle unaddressed. She told him how Genevieve had insisted she rest, how she'd kept Kaylee in the bedroom longer than necessary, delaying her bedtime. How the door refused to open. How the smoke slipped under the wood like a silent, insidious warning. How she broke the window, climbed out, and found her daughter filming. When Kaylee reached that part, the detective's pen stopped moving. "Filming," he repeated quietly, his voice an echo of disbelief. "Yes," Kaylee said, her voice unwavering. Not calling for help. Filming. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a small muscle jumping. Kaylee kept going. The hammer, the nails, the neighbors' sighting. Genevieve's behavior afterward more irritated than relieved. Her frantic, desperate visit to the motel asking Kaylee to correct her memory so the insurance claim wouldn't be denied, wouldn't ruin their future. Kaylee didn't raise her voice. She didn't tremble. The words came out steady like stones laid one after another, on a path forming an unassailable foundation. When she finished, the room was silent. The detective leaned back slowly in his chair, exhaling through his nose a long, quiet sigh. "Mrs. Hale," he began, then paused, choosing his words carefully. "What you're describing, this isn't confusion or an accident. This is intentional, and it's serious." "I know," Kaylee said. "Did your daughter ever threaten you before Mrs. Hale had asked for money? Pressure you about the house, about its value, about what she stood to gain?" "Not directly," Kaylee said. "But she assumed things, spoke as if I had already given her everything, as if my life was just the part before she inherited, as if my very existence was an inconvenience to her plans." He wrote that down carefully, his pen scratching across the paper, translating emotion into legal language. "Do you feel afraid of her?" he asked, his gaze searching. Kaylee thought about that. About the fire. About the moment she saw Genevieve's phone aimed at her burning house, a cold, calculating lens on her demise. About the motel hallway where Genevieve had tried to force her into one final, self-erasing lie. No, Kaylee thought. Not anymore. He studied her for a moment. Perhaps he expected tears, or shaking hands, or a voice that cracked under the strain. But survival, Kaylee knew, could make a person unnervingly calm, a quiet steel resolve hardening in their core. "Your statement is strong," he said. "And with the physical evidence, the insurance records, and your neighbor's testimony, we have enough to proceed." Proceed. Another small word, Kaylee thought. For another irreversible step, another line crossed. He turned off the recorder, the little red light dying quietly, extinguishing the silent witness. As he stood to walk her out, he said, his voice tinged with a weary understanding. "You've been through something terrible, Mrs. Hale. Most people break down after a night like that." "I broke down years ago," Kaylee answered. Her gaze distant, reflecting on a past self she barely recognized. "I just didn't notice it then." He didn't try to comfort her. He only nodded respectfully, a silent acknowledgement of a profound truth. Outside the station, the air felt sharper, almost metallic, clean and cold. Kaylee stood for a moment, adjusting the strap of her purse on her shoulder. Her legs trembled from the long meeting, the lingering aftermath of adrenaline, but the rest of her felt anchored solid. The truth was out now, spoken in full, recorded, signed. No one could twist it back into a shape that fit Genevieve's plans. And as Kaylee walked toward the waiting cab, she felt something unexpected settle inside her. Not relief, not triumph, just a quiet, solid certainty. She had finally said everything she'd been silent about for years. The temporary rental house Andrew helped Kaylee arrange was small. A little drafty and sparsely furnished, smelling vaguely of stale air and forgotten tenants. But it was hers for now. Hers to lock, hers to breathe in, hers to sit in without waiting for footsteps or demands. Kaylee boiled water for tea, opened the blinds to let in the pale winter light, and sat by the window, the warm mug cradled in her hands. It was quiet enough that she heard her before she reached the porch. Quick, uneven footsteps, the kind of steps people make when panic drives them faster than their thoughts. A car door slammed, then another set of footsteps, heavier, more deliberate. Silas. Kaylee didn't stand. She didn't brace herself. She just waited. The door rattled, once a tentative knock, then Genevieve's voice, sharper, more insistent this time. "Mother, open the door. I know you're in there. I see the lights." Kaylee walked to the door, slowly, deliberately, and opened it just enough to look at her through the narrow gap. Genevieve's hair was messy, escaping its careful coiffure. Her eyes were bloodshot mascara smudged either from crying or rubbing them too hard in frustration. She looked older than she did 2 days ago, her face etched with strain. Panic Kaylee observed aged faster than time. "Let me in," Genevieve said, her voice raw, pleading. "Please." "No?" Genevieve's mouth fell open, a gasp of disbelief. She hadn't expected that simple, unyielding refusal. Silas stood behind her, shifting from foot to foot, like someone about to be caught doing something stupid. His gaze fixed on some point beyond Kaylee's shoulder, refusing to meet her eyes. Genevieve pushed forward, her shoulder pressing against the door. "Mother, this is insane. You're blowing everything out of proportion. They're asking questions. They're talking about charges. You have to tell them you were confused, that you don't remember clearly." "I wasn't confused." Genevieve's face twisted, her carefully constructed composure fracturing. "You don't understand how serious this is." "I understand perfectly." She let out a sharp, frustrated breath, her voice rising in pitch. "If you don't help us, they'll ruin our lives." "You tried to ruin mine," Kaylee said, her voice quiet but piercing. Genevieve flinched, but not, Kaylee noted, because of guilt. Shame and guilt were different things. Shame came from being exposed, from failing to maintain an image. Guilt came from caring, from genuine remorse. Only one of those lived in Genevieve. She tried again, her voice regaining a desperate, placating tone. "Mother, listen. If you retract your statement, say you panicked. Say you were disoriented by the smoke." "I didn't panic." "You can fix this," Genevieve snapped, her patience worn thin. "Just fix it. I'm not responsible for fixing what you broke," Kaylee said, her voice steady, unwavering. Genevieve stared at her chest, rising and falling too quickly, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Silas cleared his throat, taking a tentative step forward. "Mrs. Hale," he said, his voice a nervous placation. "Maybe we can talk reasonably logically." Kaylee looked at him once, just once, her gaze direct and unyielding. That was enough to make him shut his mouth and take a step backward, melting back into the shadows behind Genevieve. Genevieve grabbed the doorframe, leaning in her face, desperate. "Mother, please. I'm begging you. They're talking about fraud, about arson. Do you know what that means?" "Yes, and you're okay with that." Her voice cracked, high and sharp, teetering on the edge of a scream. "You're okay with letting them destroy your own daughter." Kaylee held her gaze unflinching. "You chose your actions, Genevieve, not me." "No!" she nearly shouted, her voice thick with raw, ugly emotion. "No, you don't get to do this. You don't get to suddenly act like I matter." "I matter?" Kaylee asked quietly, her voice imbued with a lifetime of hurt, a lifetime of being overlooked. That stopped Genevieve cold. For the first time, her breath stilled. Her mouth tightened. Her eyes darted, looking for something, an excuse, a weapon, a softer version of Kaylee she could push around, manipulate. But Kaylee wasn't offering any version except the truth. "You were supposed to trust me," Genevieve whispered, her voice dropping into something small but venomous, a final, desperate accusation. "You were supposed to help us." "Help you do what?" Kaylee asked, her voice cutting through the manufactured victimhood. "Collect what you thought you deserved, even if it meant my life." Genevieve looked away, finally, unable to meet Kaylee's unwavering gaze. The silence between them felt like ice, settling over warm water, a cold, hard truth, freezing out all pretense. Finally, she said, her voice barely a whisper, "You're punishing me. Is that it? You want me to suffer?" "No," Kaylee said. "I want you to stop expecting my silence to protect you, to excuse you." Genevieve blinked, stunned. Kaylee moved to close the door. "Mother, don't do this," Genevieve said, reaching out her fingers, grazing the edge of the door, a desperate last-ditch attempt to hold on. "Don't shut me out." But it was the first thing Kaylee had to do. "I didn't shut you out," Kaylee said, her voice calm, devoid of any anger, only profound sadness. You walked away years ago. And then she closed the door. Not fast, not loud, just firmly. Genevieve's muffled voice rose for a moment. Anger, then pleading, then curses spoken too quickly to separate. Silas murmured something, a low, indistinct sound. A car started, then the sound of tires on gravel, and then finally silence. Inside the small rental house, the heater clicked on. The windows glowed faintly with the pale, ephemeral light of a winter evening. Kaylee stood there for a long time, hand resting on the door, the quiet settling over her like a heavy, comforting blanket. A heavy truth finally took its rightful place in her chest. You can love someone your whole life, she thought, and still know when it's time to let them stand outside alone with their choices. The days that followed moved quietly the way winter mornings move, slow, muted, but with a purpose that didn't need announcing. Kaylee spent most of the time at the rental house, drinking tea, answering calls from Detective Thorne, from Andrew, from Ms. Albright, the insurance fraud investigator. Each conversation added another thread to the net forming around the truth. Not a trap Kaylee understood, but just a shape that finally fit what had been happening for years, the insidious erosion of her life. On the third morning, Andrew called. "Kaylee," he said, his voice grave, professional. "The district attorney's office is filing formal charges against Genevieve and Silas." Kaylee sat down at the small kitchen table, smoothing the corner of a placemat someone else had chosen before her, her hands surprisingly steady. "What kind of charges?" she asked, her voice even. "Attempted arson, attempted insurance fraud, unlawful confinement, negligent endangerment of a dependent adult." He paused, letting the words sink in. "They're not taking this lightly, Kaylee. It's a serious case." Kaylee didn't speak for a moment, not because she was shocked. Shock had left her the night she climbed out the window, but because hearing the words said out loud in a calm, legal voice gave them a weight she hadn't anticipated, a profound finality. "Will I have to testify?" she asked. "Eventually," he said gently, "but not now. Right now, all you need to do is stay somewhere safe and let the process move forward. Trust the process, Kaylee. Yes, the process." People trusted the process because it had steps, order, a beginning and an end. Kaylee trusted it because she had already seen what trusting family without boundaries, without clear limits, could cost. "Andrew," she said quietly, her voice firm, resolute, "I want to update my will. I want to remove Genevieve and Silas." "I assumed you might," he replied, his voice understanding, devoid of judgment. He came to the rental house that afternoon with a briefcase full of forms, a quiet sentinel of legal protection. They sat at the small kitchen table, the heater humming softly behind them, a comforting background drone. He explained everything in steady, simple terms. Who receives what, how property is divided, how medical decisions are made if Kaylee couldn't speak for herself. When he finally slid the meticulously drafted papers toward her, Kaylee didn't hesitate. Her hand trembled a little as she held the pen, but it didn't stop. She crossed out Genevieve's name. She wrote another Emily, not because of pity, not because Emily had chosen Kaylee over her parents, but because Emily still understood what it meant to care, without expecting reward, to love without calculation. After Kaylee signed the last page, her signature firm and clear, Andrew gathered the documents, neatly securing them in his briefcase. "Do you feel all right?" he asked, his gaze gentle, concerned. "I feel," Kaylee said, slowly choosing her words carefully, "like I've put something back in its rightful place, like a long overdue accounting has finally been settled." That evening, Emily came by with groceries, soup bread, a small bundle of bright yellow flowers she pretended she just happened to pick up on sale. She didn't ask about the charges. She already knew enough, her quiet presence a testament to her loyalty. Instead, she made tea and sat beside Kaylee on the couch as if she'd always belonged there, a comforting anchor in the storm. "Dad's furious," Emily said quietly, her voice hushed. "He says you're ruining the family, that you're tearing us apart." Kaylee sipped her tea, letting the warmth spread through her. "A family that falls apart when truth enters the room," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Wasn't whole to begin with, my dear." Emily looked down at her hands, twisting the sleeves of her sweater, a familiar nervous habit. "I'm not choosing sides," she whispered, her gaze meeting Kaylee's clear and honest. "I'm choosing safety. I'm choosing what's right." "I know," Kaylee said, "and I'm glad you are." They sat together until dusk painted the window a dull blue, the last light fading from the sky. When Emily finally stood to leave, she hugged Kaylee longer than usual, a silent, heartfelt embrace. "Grandma," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion, "you deserve better than how they've treated you. You deserve peace." It was a simple sentence, but it settled over Kaylee like a warm cloth, comforting her in a way no platitudes ever could. Not dramatic, not loud, just honest. After Emily left, Kaylee locked the door and stood for a long time in the quiet house. The walls were thin, and she could hear the wind brushing against them, a lonely whisper. But the space felt profoundly hers, not borrowed, not controlled, not threatened. And as she turned off the lights and walked to the bedroom, one truth glowed steady inside her, a guiding star in the darkness. Losing her daughter, the daughter she had known, hurt. But losing herself, allowing herself to be consumed by Genevieve's greed and malice, would have cost far, far more. The house looked worse in daylight than Kaylee remembered. Smoke stains crept up the siding like dark, grasping fingers, and the windows were still boarded in places, grim, blank eyes in the facade. But there it stood, upright, stubborn, waiting for what came next. The restoration crew Andrew recommended arrived early. 2 burly men in heavy jackets and a woman with a clipboard, moving with quiet confidence, not pity. Kaylee appreciated that. Pity, she had learned, had a way of making a person feel smaller than the damage, diminishing their resilience. "Mrs. Hale," the woman said, her voice brisk and efficient. "We'll start with the structural assessment. You can stay inside if you'd like, but it's cold and loud, and there will be a lot of dust." "I'll sit in the yard," Kaylee said. "I want to see my house." She nodded, respectful. Kaylee found the old lawn chair behind the shed. Its paint was chipped a faded green, and one leg wobbled until she wedged a flat stone under it, finding stability. She sat with a blanket around her knees, watching the workers carry out charred wood and bring in new beams, as if they were stitching something wounded back together, mending a gaping wound. Every hammer strike felt like an answer to a question Kaylee hadn't dared to ask. Can something so damaged still stand? Yes, it can. It just looks different when it does. Around noon, Emily arrived with a thermos of tea and a bag of pastries, a small gesture of care. She sat beside Kaylee, her breath puffing in small white clouds in the cold air. She didn't talk much. She didn't need to. Sometimes Kaylee knew presence spoke more loudly than any reassurance, any words. When the crew broke for lunch, one of the men, a young fellow maybe in his mid-30s, with a gentle slowness to his movements, approached them. "Ma'am," he said, his voice soft. "The foundation's solid. The fire didn't reach it." Kaylee nodded, grateful for the small mercy, the unexpected gift of a firm base. He hesitated, scratching the back of his neck. "Not all houses do as well. You must have taken good care of it." "I tried," Kaylee said, her gaze drifting toward the boarded windows, "even when others didn't." He seemed to understand more than she meant to reveal, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. He tipped his hat and walked off to join his colleagues. Emily poured Kaylee tea, the steam rising warmly. "Grandma," she said softly, "does being here hurt?" Does seeing it like this bring it all back? It should, Kaylee said, taking a sip of the warm, sweet tea. But it doesn't. Not the way I expected. The air carried the faint scent of wet ash mixed with the cool river breeze. It wasn't pleasant, but it wasn't unbearable. Just truth carried on the wind. Kaylee watched the workers remove the last pieces of the burned bedroom door. They handled the wood gently, almost respectfully, as if aware of what had happened behind it, the silent crime it had witnessed. Kaylee felt no urge to cry. Something in her had already finished grieving. She realized the moment she closed the door on Genevieve at the rental house. "Are you scared to come back home?" Emily asked, her voice quiet. "No," Kaylee said. "I was scared when I lived here without locks on my life. Not on the doors, my dear, on myself." Emily rested her head lightly against Kaylee's shoulder, a gesture of deep affection and trust. "You're stronger than any of them realize, Grandma." Kaylee shook her head slightly. "I'm not strong. I'm just awake now. For years I'd walked through this house, quietly shrinking myself to fit the spaces others allowed me, trying to be unobtrusive. But now, watching beams, lifted walls, scraped clean floors, measured, I felt something almost unfamiliar. Choice. A man from the crew asked if Kaylee had any paint preferences for the bedroom. Light colours, darker tones, wallpaper options. She surprised herself by answering without hesitation, a decision made with swift certainty. "No wallpaper," she said. "Fresh paint. Something pale but not cold. A soft cream, perhaps, that catches the light." He nodded, jotting it down. Emily smiled. "A new start," she said. "Yes," Kaylee replied, "but not to erase anything, to reclaim it." The afternoon sunlight stretched long across the yard, casting long, slender shadows. Dust drifted in the air like soft snowfall catching the light. Kaylee's hands rested on the blanket, steady now, the tremor gone. She knew the house wouldn't be finished for weeks. She knew the legal process would take longer, winding its slow, inexorable path. She knew Genevieve would try again. Calls, messages, apologies, shaped into demands. But none of that pressed on her chest the way it once did. Because sitting there watching the first boards of her new bedroom wall go up, Kaylee understood something simple, quiet, and firm. She wasn't just rebuilding a room, she was rebuilding herself. The day they told Kaylee the last repairs were finished, she didn't rush. She waited until late afternoon when the sun softened the edges of everything, painting the world in hues of gold and rose and shadows stretched long and slow across the yard. She walked up the porch steps, new wood firm under her feet, radiating a clean, fresh scent, and turned the key in the lock. The door swung open without effort. No nails, no resistance, just a quiet, welcoming click. The air inside smelled faintly of fresh paint and new lumber, a clean, unburdened scent. The walls were lighter than before, a soft cream that made the rooms feel larger, more expansive, almost ethereal. The workers had scrubbed away the smoke stains, replaced the floors, rewired the hall, every detail addressed with care. Everything was different, yet profoundly recognizable, like a beloved face, aged gently rather than damaged. Kaylee walked slowly down the hallway, her hand grazing the smooth, newly painted wall. Her steps didn't echo. The house felt warm again, inhabited again, even though she was the only one inside. When she reached the bedroom, she paused. The door was new, simple, unadorned, solid, the exact same shape as before, but with no history of malice in its grain. She turned the knob and stepped in. The room was quiet, peaceful, almost shy, waiting for her approval. The window she'd climbed out of had been replaced. The glass was clean and clear, shimmering in the fading light. Through it, Kaylee could see the river in the distance, glinting under the late sun. A ribbon of silver flowing toward an unseen horizon. A small breeze carried the faint, crisp scent of winter grass. Kaylee walked to the bed, her old frame polished to a soft sheen, the linens freshly washed, and sat down. For the first time since that night, she let her shoulders drop, let her breath settle into a slow, even rhythm, let the immense weight she'd been carrying finally leave her spine. She thought of Genevieve, of the nailed door, of the smoke, creeping across the floor like a silent killer. Of the chilling moment she saw her daughter on the lawn phone, raised like a witness to a story she wanted to sell, a narrative she sought to control. She thought of Emily's steady hands, her quiet loyalty, the way she didn't ask for anything, only offered what she could, a selfless grace. And she thought of Edward, her steadfast husband, how he used to say that dignity wasn't something people gave you. It was something you protected, something you held on to fiercely, even when others tried to strip it away. Kaylee smoothed the blanket across her lap. Her hands were older now, thinner, the veins more pronounced, but they still worked. They had pulled her through a broken window. They had signed her name on a new will, reaffirming her choices, her autonomy. They had closed a door in a rental house with more conviction than Kaylee had known she possessed. Outside, a car passed slowly, its engine a distant hum, then faded away. Quiet returned, deep and abiding. For a long while, Kaylee simply sat there, letting the late light settle over the room, painting it in soft, forgiving hues. Nothing dramatic, no grand revelation, just a simple truth filling the air as naturally as breath. She had survived her own daughter's absence, her emotional desertion, long before she survived her betrayal. And now finally, she wasn't trying to earn her place in anyone's life. She was simply living in her own. The house creaked softly, a gentle, familiar kind of sound, like old wood, stretching its limbs, settling into comfort. It felt like acknowledgement, a quiet affirmation. Kaylee stood, walked back to the living room, and opened the windows one by one. Cold air rushed in fresh and honest cleansing. She let it sweep through the house, clearing the last remnants of smoke, of memory, of fear, leaving behind only the clean, sharp scent of winter. When she closed the final window, the home felt entirely her own again. Not because it was rebuilt, but because she was. If you saw yourself in Kaylee's story, in the quiet strength she found, in the resolve that bloomed from betrayal, then know this. Your worth is not dictated by the love you receive, but by the love you give yourself. The world may try to dim your light, to tell you that your story is over, but the fire you carry within can always be rekindled. Your voice, even if it has been silenced for years, has the power to reshape your narrative, to rewrite the ending. Like Kaylee, you are allowed to reclaim yourself, to build new walls and open new windows, not to forget the past, but to live fully in the present, unburdened by the expectation or machinations of others. Your journey is yours alone, and every step, no matter how small, is a testament to your courage. Speak up. Leave your mark. Sometimes all it takes to start again is one door you refuse to let others close, one quiet act of self-preservation that redefines everything. Trust in the quiet strength that emerges when you stop seeking validation from those who never offered it freely. Find your own truth and let it light your way home. The end.